Shares for beginners.
Phil Muscatello and Finpods are authorised reps of Money Sherpa. The information in this podcast is general in nature and doesn't take into account your personal situation.
G'day and welcome back to Shares for Beginners. I'm Phil Muscatello. Way out of the ASX 200, the ASX 300, even the small ordinaries, is an often overlooked sector of the market. We're getting the microscope out to focus on the microcap sector of the Aussie stock market and welcoming old friend of the podcast, Mark Tobin from Coffee Microcaps. G'day, Mark.
G'day, Phil. Good to be back on.
Yeah, great to have you back. And we're actually going to be meeting each other in real life in a couple of weeks at the Coffee Microcaps, the first real in-life conference for 3 years, something like that.
Yeah, the last one was October 2019. And then we were supposed to have another one March 2020. And had to pull the pin on that a week before the event. So we had tickets sold and presenters lined up. Between one thing and another, COVID restrictions being the kind of main impediments to doing another one. This is the first one now since October 2019. So it's like 3.5 years. So looking forward to meeting yourself in person. And a lot of other people that I've connected with through our Coffee Microcap morning meetings that we've been running over Zoom over the last kind of 2.5 years that kicked off and we couldn't do live events anymore. And, people you just meet through Twitter and LinkedIn and social media over the last 2 years that, haven't had a chance, whereas normally it might be 2 or 3 months in between meeting them. It's been a bit of a surreal experience to know yourself and a few others for the last 2 years, but not had a opportunity or a venue to actually connect in person.
So tell us about the microcap sector. What is your definition of a microcap?
Yeah, look, the definition of Australia is there's no real hard and fast definition. A lot of people will say, it's anything under 500 million market cap. Others will say anything under 300 million market cap. Some people will just say, well, anything outside the 200 or outside the ASX 300 index. In the US, they say 300 million market cap and under. So I kind of stick with that. It's the largest capital market in the world. So I think they kind of know what they're talking about a lot of the time. So I kind of stick with that, 300 million under that, I kind of say is a microcap. And I also kind of find, I've been working in the kind of microcap space for a good few years now. When stocks start to even get to that 250 million to 300 million mark, then they start getting picked up by the odd broker. There might be one analyst covering them or 2 analysts covering them. And they, seem to kind of get their name out and about in the markets. And, people, have at least maybe heard of the name, if I can say that in the kind of broad investing community. So, I think once you've kind of reached that point of having 1 or 2 analysts covering you, you can kind of say you've maybe graduated, as I say, from the microcap space into the bottom end of the small cap space, and you're coming on a different investor base's radar.
And you exclude the mining sector, I believe, and is it the biotech sector as well? Are they the main ones that you exclude?
I wouldn't say exclude them. I just don't really focus on them. I think the mining companies get a lot of exposure. I know there's a couple of big mining conferences coming up in May in Sydney, and there's a big one that happens in Melbourne, and I think the Sydney Mining Club does a great job. Perth Mining Club does a great job. I don't exclude them. I just think they're very well served in other places, and they have plenty of options to get their story out there. So I try and look at maybe ones that don't have as many options to get their story out there. And the biotech sector is the same. There's the AusBio conference and the big biotech conference in New Zealand that used to happen pre-COVID. I'm not sure if it's back on track in Queenstown now post-COVID. But that's also a sector that seems to do well in marketing itself, no matter what size the companies are. Purely and the biotech thing, I think it's easy to get media attention if you're working on a new medical device or a new drug or a new treatment for something. It's quite easy to get that PR in the mainstream media. Whereas I think some of the companies that might be presenting at my conference, would struggle ever to get something on Channel 7 News.
So what is it about this sector that gets you excited?
the biggest thing that I like about it is just the variety. There's just so many different companies in there, and I look ahead quite a lot, and sometimes somebody will email me and they'll be like, have you looked at this stock, or you should get these guys into the conference, or I have one of the Zoom webinars, and it'll be like kind of something totally new to me. It might have been a quiet IPO that listed 6 months ago, and I heard about it at the time, but I haven't really had a chance to focus on it with other things going on. And that's the thing with the microcap sector. I mean, if you do a quick stock screener on your share trading account, and you put in even 350 million, I mean, it'll throw up probably 1,500 stocks. Now, the mining and biotech guys are mixed in there, but 1,500 stocks, that's an incredible amount of diversity. So there'll definitely be something in there for everyone. And equally, it just makes it impossible to stay on top of every story. And with that many stocks, it's just a huge universe. So, that's what I like about it the most. You just so many different business models, lots of like niche businesses that you would kind of never think of. And, you just get an insight into so many like different little businesses, where I find when you go up into the ASX 200, whatever, it's like dominated by the big banks and the big miners. And the big retailers, and they're very kind of businesses we all know. There's nothing, BHP does this, CSL does this, Coles and Woolies do that. There's nothing kind of that people don't kind of know. But we were talking just before we started about a company called Shekel Brainway, who's going to be presenting at the Sydney conference. They do weigh your stuff at the at Woolies or Coles, and it checks on the little self-checkout thing, those checkout counters and the technology behind them, and even stuff they're doing on shelves now, like kind of retail technology. They're one of the kind of leaders in that globally. People realize it's a product, it's there, but, you kind of never think, well, what is the business behind it? And, what goes into it? And, how do they kind of market their product and sell their product? So that's, things like that, I think is for me is one of the most interesting parts.
And how's the performance of this sector? Or can I say index? Should I say index or sector?
You can say index, yeah. Has it been amazing? Let's not try put lipstick on a pig here over the last year, 18 months. But I mean, you can kind of say that for all indexes, it's been a rough time for equity investors as we've kind of flipped from the low interest rate environment into the high interest rate environment. But I mean, if you zoom out a bit, let's say, and we say, well, how have kind of the ASX Emerging Companies Index, which is the reference microcap index for the ASX, if we take a 5-year view on it, it's done 9.1% per annum over those 5 years, sorry. And, that's just above, what the ASX 200 has done, which is, 8.7% over the same 5-year period. So, it hasn't been great in the last year. It's kind of underperformed their kind of large cap cousins. But like everything in the equity markets, it waxes and wanes. Large caps outperform for a while, microcaps then come back into vogue. And, the cycle flips on its head once again. But one of the interesting things I think, for Australian-based investors is, the ASX microcap market, that 9.1% over the last 5 years, is actually one of the better performing indexes globally. I mean, if we look at Canada, which most people might think is, somewhat similar to Australia, big country, small population, big focus on mining. Their index, which is the TSX Venture Exchange, that's down minus 4.5% annualized over the last 5 years. And even, if you look at the US or the UK, I've got it here, the US, 4.2% over the last 5 years. So, less than half of what...
Even the US?
Yeah, 4.2. And then the UK with all their Brexit troubles, I done like 3.6. I mean, that's also less than half of what the ASX microcap index has achieved. So if you look at it on kind of short-term view, hasn't done great, but on the longer-term view, with ups and downs, good years, bad years, 9% over the last 5 years, I think is, pretty respectable return for the index.
And how do you think investors should approach this sector of the market? And I'm, choosing my words carefully here, is obviously because there's going to be people listening to this podcast who might get excited by the stories, because there's some great stories in there. But Do you counsel any caution in approaching this sector?
There's definitely more risk in these names than what you're going to find in the ASX 200. In terms of the business model, still maybe needs to be proven, or it hasn't been around as long as, Commonwealth Bank, for example, or some of the big retailers, businesses that have, been the fabric of the Australian, business environment for a couple of decades. In many cases, there might be a business that's 4 or 5 years old, or maybe 10 years old. So I think, I definitely caution that they maybe haven't seen as many ups and downs and survived as many ups and downs as some of their bigger counterparts. But, we can also look back and say, when CSL listed, back in the early 90s, it was a microcap when it listed. It came on, I think it was $294 million market cap back then, and you look at where it is today. So, you talk about the good stories. I think CSL is, a classic story of, a business that, was a microcap when it listed, and you can see where it's ended up now. In terms of, approaching the sector, there's no ETFs available for, people who think, there must be an ASX microcap ETF. They just don't exist. And I don't want to get into the specifics structurally why you don't have one. So you're kind of two options if you're looking to get exposure in a professionally managed vehicle, if I can say that. There's a couple of listed investment companies that focus on the LICs and run by, kind of well-established LIC managers. Wilson Asset Management, where I used to actually work. Back in the day, they've got a dedicated microcap LIC, along with, a whole plethora of other offerings. NEOS Asset Management, who've been around for a long time as well, they've got a dedicated microcap LIC as part of their kind of LIC offering as well. And there's one or two others. And then on the active manager side, there's a whole swathe of fund managers who either have kind of like, NEOS and Wilson's, where, they have a microcap fund as part of their overall offering, or they could be a specialist niche manager who just has a single standalone microcap fund, and that's their like kind of total area of focus, or they might have a microcap one plus a small cap one. And, some of those also have been around for 5-10 years in some cases, more than 10 years in some cases. So you can kind of look at their fact sheets and all the relevant information there, and you've actually got 10-year performance numbers to look at, or 5-year performance numbers to kind of give you an inkling of how these managers have performed through a few ups and downs in the cycle. But yeah, unfortunately the passive option is not really there for people. So it's either direct shares yourself if you're into doing the research and trying to understand a few of the names out at 1500, or if that's not really, you haven't got the time, or you don't feel you've got the expertise, then the listed investment companies or a few of the actively managed funds are going to be your next option.
So tell us about the conference.
Yeah, so the conference, maybe if we backtrack a bit to when I did the first one, and I started the conference out of pure kind of frustration for myself. I was like, wasn't really, I felt, a microcap conference happening in Sydney that, got these companies in, there was, lots of good companies, lots of good stories, but I just didn't think there was one happening. Microequities, who are a fund manager specifically in the microcap space, they used to run a conference themselves for a couple of years, and then, obviously it's not really their main business, they're a fund manager at heart, and it kind of stopped and nothing replaced it. There's been a long-running microcap conference in Melbourne, but there was nothing running in Sydney. So I said, well, I'm just going to start one myself. So I did that. And yeah, the reception was like really good. People were keen for more of them. And yeah, we've been kind of rolling with them ever since. So Sydney is going to be a standard one-day conference. We've got 13 companies, supposed to be 12, but we had to squeeze in a baker's dozen there to accommodate one of the companies. And it's a whole mix of, what I loosely term industrial microcaps. So that's kind of, there's no mining or biotech names in there, but, we've got companies from the construction sector, technology, financial services, a real mix, and all at different stages of their developments as well. Some of them, I would say, are a bit more in that kind of startup growth phase. Others, are, well-established, profitable, paying dividends as part of their kind of setup. So, you've got a good mix of companies in there. So I think there'll be, something for everybody. If you're not keen on the kind of growth names, there's definitely more established names in there that, could be of interest to other investors.
So you've got a discount code for listeners to this podcast. Tell us about that. Oh, and sorry, and it's Sydney and Melbourne as well, isn't it? You talked about Sydney.
Yeah, so
Melbourne in Melbourne.
Yeah, so Sydney is going to be April 27th, which is the Thursday after Anzac Day. And then we are going to be kicking off in Melbourne then the following Tuesday, May 2nd. Just to know, on the Melbourne conference, we're only doing a half-day conference in Melbourne. We're going to have 7 or 8 companies. We're just trying to finalise the last 1 or 2 speakers there. But same kind of vein as Sydney. It's a mix of companies, industrial microcaps, and also, technology, financial services, healthcare, food and beverage ones in Melbourne as well, which is interesting. And yeah, the discount code is for Shares for Beginners listeners and fans. Phil himself will be attending here at the
Sydney conference. That's right. Yep.
Sydney. If you want to meet the voice behind the app in person, this is a good way.
Come and say hi.
Come and say hi. So the ticket price is $40, and that includes GST and booking fee. So it's 25% off, and the code for the Sydney conference is CMSID, and then the code for the Melbourne conference is CM Melbourne. So that's CMMELB, CM Melbourne.
And Sydney is CMSYD.
Yeah, so Charlie, Mike, Sierra, Yankee, Delta.
I've always meant to try and learn that.
If I can remember from my short seafaring career, I think that was what they all stand for.
Well, that's great. Well, we look forward to chatting with people that come along to the conference, and remember that discount code. It'll be in the episode notes as well, so you can find that. Can I just clarify, is it 25% off the $40 or is it 25% after?
Yeah, 25% after, so you basically get it for $30. And just where the tickets are available, it's on the Humanitics ticketing platform. So if you just search Coffee Microcaps on there, it'll pull up the 2 events, and you just plug the discount code into whichever one you want. I will say tickets we're getting down to the last few in Sydney. So if you're thinking about coming to Sydney, I would kind of jump on it sooner rather than later. We've got a bit more capacity still left in Melbourne, but I think, what normally happens in previous experience, lastminute.com, people leave it, and tends to fill up very quickly now in these kind of last 2 weeks, 10 days.
Okay, Mark, looking forward to meeting you there.
Yep, see you there.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for listening to Shares for Beginners. You can find more at sharesforbeginners.com. If you enjoy listening, please take a moment to rate or review in your podcast player, or tell a friend who might want to learn more about investing for their future.